2 Samuel chapter 16, and we find David in maybe, possibly, his darkest hour. David's darkest hour. One of the low points in David's life. He no longer appears as the victorious king, as the triumphant giant slayer, as the ruler of Israel. No, this is a difficult chapter. David is falling into many challenges. We will see how he responds in a godly way. We see here loving discipline. We see the providence of God providing for David even in these dark times. And we see genuine faith that continues, and perhaps especially in the darkest times, that's when we see true faith. There is here in this chapter a spy. I'll give you his name later. And there is a traitor. I'll give you his name too. So we just go back to chapter 15 and recap a little bit the verses that we mentioned earlier. 2 Samuel 15 and verse 30. David has gone to weep and to pray. He's gone to pray on the Mount of Olives. Does that sound familiar? Where the Lord Jesus Christ went to pray. David is weeping, and in the symbols of the time, in verse 30 of chapter 15, David went up by the ascent of Mount Olivet, and went as he went up. Here is a man burdened. Here is a man wearing sackcloth and ashes, as it were. He goes without footwear. He's barefoot, and all the people that are with him covered their heads. This is a time of mourning. What's happened? Well, David's rule is threatened by his own son, Absalom. So that's the context, really, for the chapter that we're going to consider. And the first heading is this: the consequences continue for David's sin. So we remember David's sin, of course, with Bathsheba, and then we remember Amnon, who was taken in incest with his sister, Tamar. And then we see Absalom taking matters into his own hand, revenge over Amnon. And so Absalom is living with the fact that he murdered his own brother. He's living with bitterness, contempt. Well, God will forgive David. God has forgiven David in chapter 12 of 2 Samuel. But the consequences continue. And that's the lessons that we learned last time. And so we come to the next heading. Here is the crisis. Chapter 16, David has gone. He's gone to weep. He's gone to pray. And he's going up to the top of the hill. Chapter 16 and verse 1. When David was a little past the top of the hill, he's in crisis. He knows that his rule, he knows that his reign is threatened, and it's threatened by one who is bitter. It's threatened by his own son. What grief this must give to King David. But there is hope. He will find out who his true friends are. One of them is to be Hushai. We'll come back to him. Hushai is by now aged, but Hushai will be used of God to deliver David from Absalom. So God provides help in a crisis. Go back to chapter 15. It came to pass, verse 32, that when David came to the top of the mount where he worshipped God, behold, Hushai. Now, I won't go back to the previous chapters, but Hushai is an aged man, and he is described as a friend of David. But because he's aged, David decides that he should stay in Jerusalem and not make the journey. It would slow them down, it says. But Hushai is going to become the spy that's sent to Jerusalem to find out what's going on so that David is aware and informed. back to chapter 15, verse 32, David was come to the top of the mount where he worshipped God. You see, David is approaching this crisis with a spiritual mindset. He's not going to go to pieces. David has fallen many, many times, fallen terribly with Bathsheba, fallen in not dealing with Absalom earlier on when he should have done. But now, David has gone to pray and to worship. And so the Lord is going to provide in some quite remarkable ways. The darkness has not passed, the difficulty is not gone, but the Lord is now with David. Hushai comes, and Hushai is sent to Jerusalem to be the spy in the camp where Absalom and Ahithophel are hatching their plan. And we'll pick that up a little later. Verse 34, if thou return to the city and say to Absalom, I will be thy servant. He's going to spy, he's going to pretend it's legitimate within the context of warfare. He won't be dishonest, I don't believe, but he's going to take on a neutral position of feigned loyalty for Absalom. So let's come down to our main subject tonight. God provides help in a crisis. The second heading and verse 1. When David was a little past, Hushai's been sent off, David's friend, into the city. That's the end of chapter 15. And he's come to Absalom. And there's David. He's on the hillside. And David is weary. What's he going to do? He's got a few of the men with him. Not everybody has betrayed him. Some have. Ahithophel was once his advisor, but now he's moved to advise Absalom. But there's David. And help comes from the most unlikely source. Ziba. We came across him in chapter 9. Ziba had been appointed by David to look after the crippled man, Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was the last remaining close relative of Saul's son, Jonathan. Jonathan's son was crippled, age 5, when his nurse fled because of news of the death of Saul and Jonathan. And Ziba, who was fit and able, was to look after Mephibosheth and the land that he was given and to care for him. But Ziba comes with bad motives. We'll find out that later in chapter 19 and verse 24 when we come to it. But despite his bad motive, God uses Ziba to care for David. And that's often the case in the Christian life. Sometimes God uses enemies or those that have a mixed motive to supply the needs of his people. So he comes in the ancient terms with 200 loaves of bread. It's as though he's been shopping. 100 bunches of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a bottle of wine. And a little group of men that are with David. Possibly Bathsheba is with him too, and some of the household, but they need refreshing, and God sends supplies just when they are needed. God cares for his people. If you have need tonight, if you find yourself in a situation where life is tough, as it is for many, you can be confident in the providence of God, the sovereignty of God. He will use even those who have bad motives to give providential care for his people. So circumstantially and providentially, the provisions come from a man who has another motive. And David questions Ziba. What do you mean, verse 2, by these? Why are you providing these for me? I know that you've got a dubious motive. But Ziba doesn't give away his heart. He says these are to refresh your men. And so we move on to the third heading. Come down to verse 5. Trials reveal the true character of man. When David came to Bahurim, behold, thence came out a man of the family of the house of Saul. Now this man is an evil man, Shimei. You see the battle between David's house and Ziba, who was of Saul's house, and Shimei, who was of Saul's house, goes on. The battle typified in the battle between light and darkness. David standing for light, Saul's house and the remnants of it standing for darkness. And as he sees David coming, he starts to hurl blasphemous abuse at David. He starts casting stones and dirt. He's up there on the hillside and he's looking down, and there's David. He's got his men on the left, he's got his men on the right, and they're pelting stones. They've got an unfair advantage, they're above them. And he starts abusing this man of God, the Lord's anointed. He says, "Thou bloody man." Now David was not a bloody man, he was a man of war, righteous war. But there were many opportunities in David's life for him to kill, including Saul, on a number of occasions, but he didn't. David cannot be described as a man that wanted blood, but that's the accusation. Come out, thou man of Belial, thou man of idols, Satan worshipping idols. Those who bow down to foreign gods, these things are not true. They must have hurt. They must have cut to David's heart. He must have thought, I can deal with this man. But no. He says, verse 8, it carries on, the Lord has returned upon thee all the blood of the house of Saul. Everything that's happening to you, David, is God's divine retribution for what you did to Saul. No, it's not. Saul had had the spirit removed. David was the Lord's anointed. Yes, David had sinned, he'd fallen, but he was the Lord's anointed. These things were not happening because of that. They were happening partly because David had dealt with Absalom when he should have done. Now he says, the kingdom has been put into the hand of Absalom, thy son. And that's not true. Absalom thinks so, and maybe a majority of the Israelites who've gone with Absalom, including Ahithophel, but not yet. Too soon. Shimei's words won't become true. At the end of verse 8, thou art taken in mischief because thou art a bloody man. So we begin to see the character of Shimei. Well, David still has true friends. He has Hushai, who's gone ahead, and the Lord has others to care for David. But one of David's men, Abishai, thinks that they need to take matters into their own hands. We've seen this again and again. It seems to be this sort of ancient custom. If something happens, we need to revenge. Let's go for blood. Let's kill. Let's cut the head off. But that's not to be. David would not have any of it. Here's Abishai, verse 9. Why should this dead dog, that was the expression used of Mephibosheth, and it's carried on for his household. Mephibosheth called himself a dead dog, but his master is also called by that title. So Abishai says, let me go over and I'll lop his head off, like cutting a laurel bush. The king said, what have I to do with you? That's not the way I do things. I'm trusting in the Lord. I'm not going to cut corners. I'm not going to look for blood. I'm not going to revenge these matters. Yes, what he says is ghastly. It's unfair. Sometimes in the Christian life, people say things, particularly of ministers. It's especially in the workplace of believers. Things which are unfair, they're unjust, they're not true. But it doesn't give us an excuse to hit out. It doesn't mean that we can behave in any way we like. And so here's the pivotal verse in the whole chapter coming up. Verse 10, just as the backdrop, the king said, "What have I to do with thee? So let him curse. Because the Lord has said, curse David." The Lord's in control. He's cursing me, and God has permitted it. A verse in the Psalms that I often quote, Psalm 119, "It was good for me that I was afflicted." David is saying, I accept that this man is cursing me, and the Lord has permitted it. But here's David's real response. David said to Abishai, look at this verse very carefully, and the one that follows. David said to Abishai and to all his servants, "Behold, my son Absalom, which came forth of my bowels, seeketh my life." He knows the facts. "How much more now may this Benjamite Shimei do it? Let him alone, let him curse. He can do what he likes. Sticks and stones will hurt my bones. The Lord has bidden him, the Lord has allowed it. The Lord's hand is greater than the hand of this Benjamite." Now here's the key verse, verse 12. This is a spiritual response to adversity and to troubles and to affliction. This is something we can learn from tonight. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction. What's your affliction tonight? For some of you it's health. For some of you it's deteriorating health. For some of you it's a loved one that doesn't know the Lord. For some of you, there are trials in the family circle. There are relationships that haven't been reconciled. There is sin in the camp. What's your affliction? You know it, I don't necessarily. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction. This is very personal. You can apply this to your own heart tonight. And that the Lord will return, repay, requite. It's actually the word for repent. Turn back. The Lord will return, maybe that's the best word, return me good for his cursing this day. And the Lord does. He lets the cursing go on. He lets the stones fall and the dust settle. And David and his men went by the way. This is the fourth heading. Humility under God's chastening hand. This has happened because partly of sin, David's negligence, not parenting properly, not ruling properly, but David accepts it. If the Lord wills, I will absorb it. I will be resilient. I will accept it. If the Lord has allowed the affliction, it's for a reason. There will be something good in it, something for my spiritual benefit. All affliction draws us nearer to God. Have you ever had a bad affliction? Have you ever had an illness that took you away? It's the Lord's kindness that he permits affliction. Let him alone, says David. Let him curse. Let him do his worst. The Lord has bidden him. The Lord's arranged it. He's humbling him. This is one of David's most spiritually mature moments. Now, what about you and me? When we're under the rod, under affliction, when a loved one has cancer, when we lose a job, when our relationship with somebody we care for is broken, what do we say? Do we say, well, if the Lord wills it, accept it. And the Lord may return good out of this situation for my blessing. When suffering comes, we should examine ourselves before God. Is there some impurity that needs to be refined? And when it's done, I shall come forth as gold and silver, as Job said. We shouldn't immediately defend ourselves. That's a human characteristic, isn't it? David didn't. He allowed it to carry on. He didn't need to defend himself. Sometimes some criticism is justified. And we need to take what's true out of what's painful. We need to take it on board. God may still use criticism and negative situations for our spiritual good. We should be, as David rightly is here, swift to hear, slow to speak, and even slower to be angry. So we look down to verse 12. And here is faith in action. It may be that the Lord will look on my affliction. He's looking forward. He's not just focusing on the here and now. So often we get so absorbed in he said this and she said that and then they did this. You know, sometimes people, they can't stand back and get perspective. They just have to narrate a whole conversation. And yet David looks through. He sees what's happening now. And he says, I'm going to look to the future by faith. And I'm going to see good. And I'm going to see God's hand. And I'm going to see why God has brought me here to this situation. And there will be a reason. I may not understand it now, but one day I will. Faith looks beyond. I was reading about Samuel Rutherford, a Scottish divine, born in 1600. And he ministered just north of the borders. And he said this: our greatest sufferings can become our sweetest communion with Christ, if viewed through the eyes of faith. He was imprisoned in Aberdeen, and from his prison cell, where he was forbidden to preach, a bit like our own John Bunyan in the 17th century, same century as Bunyan, he wrote this from his prison cell: oh, if you saw the beauty of Jesus and smelled the fragrance of his love in crosses, in losses, in prison, in fire, you should go about the streets crying, have you seen him in whom my soul loves? There was a man who had much affliction. His first wife died. He had children that died young. He was in prison for his faith. He had difficult times, but even in crosses and losses, in prison, in fire, he could see the beauty of Jesus and smell the fragrance that came through his afflictions. So faith looks beyond. It doesn't feel the pain. We feel it physically. Of course we do. It's not to say that pain is real, but we can look beyond. We look beyond when the Lord will provide, and the Lord will answer. Dark days are not the end of our story. Believers may not understand what's happening now, and God's purposes will ripen, as the hymn writer says, and we can trust his wisdom. All things work together for good. That difficulty, that affliction, I look back and I say, it was good for me. It happened for a reason. And I was brought to my knees. I was humbled. I was being proud, and the Lord humbled me. You think of Joseph back in Genesis 50. You meant it for evil, but God meant me to be in prison for good. And he verses 13 and 14, another heading. Adversity received with humility. David is on the pathway. He's carried on, we imagine, through the valley with the stones coming down and the dust. David and his men went by the way, and Shimei went along the hillside over against him and cursed as he went. It must have been awful. Saying things that were unkind, untrue, mostly, and unfair. Throwing at him stones, casting dust. I remember teaching Sunday school years ago. This was in the 90s. And there were some teenagers outside throwing stones at the window. It was a small thing, but it sort of got your emotions going. It must have got David's emotions going to have stones thrown, let alone from a physical threat. But he was the Lord's anointed, and the Lord would keep him. And so, verse 14, here's a crossroads. And the king and all the people that were with him came weary. I imagine they took the loaves and the raisins, and they took the fruit and the wine, and they refreshed themselves there. The Lord had brought them to a crossroads. They were able to look back and say, the Lord kept us. The Lord helped us. We need times of refreshing, holiday, rest. The Lord's Day, the best day of the week, the time to come aside, the time to seek refreshment, to seek the Lord's provision, and that's what David does. And all the people that were with him. That's lovely, isn't it? The pastor and his people. They've come through the valley. They've come through the hardship and the difficulty, and they've known the challenge, and they've known the cursing, but they are now refreshed. But this turns our mind's eye away from David. Here's the most important thing tonight. We look away from David, and we begin to see in the typical language that David describes in this phase of his life, David is being rejected as the king. There are usurpers. There are those that don't want his rule. There are those that despise him. And we begin to see Christ, even in David's life. David is walking a road, literally, of rejection. He seeks times of refreshing. That's what the Lord did. That's what the Saviour did. David is being cursed, despised, and treated shamefully. Just look at the parallels here. Here's David, rejected, driven from Jerusalem, enduring insults, but refusing to retaliate and revenge. That's the same as Christ. Christ was rejected by Israel. He was led outside Jerusalem to be, as it were, stoned to death. He was mocked, he was reviled, but when he was reviled, he reviled not again. So we see, even in David here, glimpses of Christ. Christ went to refresh himself when he was weary. I want to come as our final heading towards the end of the chapter, the depths of human sin, and despite this, God's sovereign plan. So we turn the attention back to Jerusalem. And Absalom is there, and all the people, the men of Israel. I don't know how many Absalom has, but it seems like he's got the majority. He's got the favour of the people as they come into the gate. We thought of this a few weeks ago. He listens to their problems, he gives them sweet answers, and he's won the hearts of the people. On the outside, he's got no blemish. On the inside, Absalom is a proud and evil man who killed his own brother Amnon, and now he wants to take the throne from his father. Oh, look at the depths here. Let me just pick out a few details. He takes his own father's counsel, Ahithophel, verse 15. He came to Jerusalem, and Ahithophel was with him. This man who's known for his counsel and his wisdom, it says in verse 23, that when Ahithophel spoke, it was as though what he spoke was as the oracles of God. This man spoke the truth. This man had wisdom. And Absalom takes him to himself. But then look down and see what Absalom does. You see, Ahithophel says, your father has left Jerusalem. In the palace, he has concubines. Not right. It's what many kings did in those days. David has left the palace. Go and take all the privileges, so to speak, rights. Go and take the position of your father and let everybody know. And go up to the rooftop, same place where David had seen Bathsheba. And let's put a tent up there. And you go and live in the tent on the top of the house, and let all of Israel know, verse 21, that you are keeping the house and you have borrowed your father's concubines. And there, verse 22, in the tent on the top of the house, it's horrible. David's sin is being repeated and multiplied and exaggerated 10 times over by his own son. What David did was done in secret. What Absalom is doing, verse 22, is in the sight of all Israel. And the prophecy from 2 Samuel 12 that the sword will not leave the house, that's been proven to be true. Absalom has killed his own brother Amnon. And your wives and concubines will be taken. That's been true. And so, at the end of the chapter, the counsel of Ahithophel. So was all the counsel of Ahithophel, both with David and with Absalom. What will happen to Absalom? Well, we shall see next week. He doesn't have a good ending. This bloody, sinful, shocking family breakdown with the consequences of sin, the domino effect from one year to the next is going on and on. But David has been humbled. David has drawn near to his God. He's gone up Mount Olivet to pray. He has drawn near. He's accepted the punishment. He's accepted the curse. He's accepted his lot. So here's the lessons today. The sovereignty of God can be seen especially in affliction. Never push back on affliction. God is in charge. We see the chastening of God's children is for good. It was for David's good. We see humility and acceptance before the hand of providence. We see faith in the midst of darkness and trials. And we see the very bitter fruits of sin in Absalom and in the palace and in that family at large. And finally, most significantly perhaps, the rejection of God's anointed king. There will be a majority, perhaps, in all generations who will not have the anointing, who will have a different man, who will have a godless man, even a Satan man, as Absalom was, instead of the anointed king. David is weak, he's humiliated, he's vulnerable. But in the midst of that situation, We see evidences of grace in David's life. He knows where to go in trial. He knows not pride but humility is the right response. It may be, no presumption, it may be the Lord will look on my affliction. Can you say that tonight? Whatever your circumstance, house, family, your life, your marriage, your children, it may be the Lord will look on my affliction and he will return me good where I deserved the opposite. Well, may the